There are a lot of strange ironies in the discourse that ensued after my video that dared to question whether or not really the government of France should spend hundreds of millions of dollars to rebuild the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. It's not so great a use of your time as a viewer. It's not so great a use of my time for me to be unpacking and explaining and reflecting on those ironies. The sad fact is that in the same way that most people who call themselves vegan activists are fake vegans, most people who call themselves atheist activists are fake atheists. They fundamentally have no vision of the future in which December is not dominated by Christmas, and in which the streets of Paris are not dominated by cathedrals. The streets of Paris, the streets of Montreal, I think even if you go to other colonial countries like Australia, the extent to which that Christian legacy dominates your daily life. And they will excuse this as cultural heritage and tradition. They'll use all the same excuses they're familiar with making for why they still celebrate Christmas while being quote-unquote atheists. They'll now extend to architecture. And if you stop and ask them, when you think about the future of Indonesia, when you think about the future of Malaysia, when you think about the future of Saudi Arabia, is that what you want for those places? Is for the dominion of Islam to go on forever and ever? For Islam to always dominate the calendar? For Islam to always dominate the streets, the physical geography, the social geography? For Islam to always dominate education so that children are always going to Islamic education? And then very simply, you can change the word Islam to Christianity and say, well, why is it you have no vision for the future in the Western world where Christianity doesn't dominate our lives in this way? The reason why this is so hard for people to cope with, I mean, of course, partly it's just shocking. It's just shocking to be the one person who dares to question spending millions and perhaps $1 billion on rebuilding Notre Dame Cathedral. But that shock aside, the discourse I'm trying to engage in here doesn't fall neatly into familiar categories like rights and freedoms. It doesn't fall neatly into a question of separation of church and state. Do you have the right to do this? Do you have the freedom to do that? And when I talk about December being dominated by Christmas, I'm not talking about oppression. I'm not talking about the church coming and terrorizing me and oppressing me and forcing me to celebrate Christmas. That's not what happens. We're getting into a gray area here of talking about long-term cultural change, institutional change, education, and ultimately government policy. All right? My daughter has grown up in France. Her primary home is in France. On the streets of France, the architecture that surrounds her is Christian. All of the architectural monuments, there are from century after century showing different architectural styles. There are Gothic cathedrals everywhere. It's a huge part of her childhood. In her formal education in school, in her supposedly secular school, she hears about Christmas like every day for 2 months of the year. On the streets, again, for about a month, I suppose, Christmas decorations, Christmas fairs are paid for and encouraged by the city government, I think by the provincial and federal government also. You know, there are all kinds of celebrations of and declarations of Christmas that make it a dominating part of her childhood and make it very difficult to raise a child knowing, look, there's something special about you. You're not one of the people who celebrates Christmas. Okay? Now, Buddhism doesn't have that role in French society. It's not the case that there's 1 month a year where there are all kinds of decorations put up to celebrate the birth of the Buddha or the death of the Buddha for that matter, or the Buddha's attaining nirvana for that matter. No. It's not the case that at public expense or private expense. It's not the case that over time, just Let the centuries go by, and life in Paris or life in any other city in France will start to have a cosmopolitan and equal representation of different religions from around the world. It's not the case that Buddhism and Hinduism will start to be equally represented in education, in the calendar, in the culture. No. And in a sense, when you shift from these more formal measures of culture to the informal measures, to the commercial culture, the role that Santa Claus has in life, equivalent to something like Batman and Superman and Mickey Mouse, just the commercialized way in which these traditions rooted in Christianity then become part of the daily lives of children. This has a profound long-term knock-on effect. Now, what's the plan for the future, guys? Where are we going to be in the year? This is already 2019. Where are we going to be in 2050? The answer coming back from these atheist discussion forums and even from complete hypocrite atheist leaders like Richard Dawkins is that, oh, no, this so-called cultural heritage can go on forever and ever. It can go on with an unlimited budget, that it can and should be continued forever. And the counter-argument is difficult for people to make precisely because we're talking about the extent to which culturally Christianity dominates our lives. And it's easier to see when you talk about someone who's an atheist trying to live in a Muslim majority country. You think, wow, that must be hard. It must be hard walking around the streets of, Islamabad, or walking around the streets of Riyadh or any of these Muslim majority cities, and just being surrounded all the time by the call to prayer, being surrounded all the time by, Islamic architecture, so on and so forth, and by the public celebration of Islamic festivals, right? Gee, that must be hard to be an atheist doing that. Do you not see that it's hard to be an atheist and raise a child in Montreal, Canada? Do you not see the way in which it's hard to be an atheist and raise a child in Paris because of the cultural domination of that society by Christianity in various forms? It's domination, but it's not oppression, right? And these kinds of cultural expectations have an insidious role in our lives. I'm divorced now. When I was married to my ex-wife and I, we went to see a doctor during her pregnancy. And we got tests, and this doctor was freaking out. This doctor was not composed, this doctor was not talking to us in a rational, down-to-earth manner. This doctor was really shaken up because one of the tests came back with a worrying sign for the health of the baby. It turned out to be completely fake, but doesn't matter. False. Shouldn't say fake. Turned out to be false. We did more tests, and things were fine. But at that moment, this doctor is like trembling and upset and really freaked out because we got a bad test result. And I want to know more about the science behind this test result and what does this mean. And the doctor is not able to answer these questions. She's shaken up and she says to us, just go home and pray to God. It's not a nurse. It's not the secretary. This is a professional medical doctor who told us to go home and pray to God. Now, I'm still not oppressed. Freedom of speech. Doctors have the right to say that. And I had the right to say back to her, hey, you know what? When I have a medical and scientific problem in my life, I'm interested in medical and scientific information, and I do not pray to God. She was so shaken up, this woman, this doctor, she says back to us, she said, oh, well, if you don't pray to God, then just go home and pray to Buddha, or pray to Vishnu, or pray to whoever you pray to. And I had to say to her again, I do not pray to any gods, plural. Okay? Well, we have these. It's not even what Buddhism is about as a religion, frankly, but that's not the story. It was a very dramatic and very tense scene. And this woman, the doctor, she was wearing traditional Muslim headscarf, traditional hair covering, traditional flowing kind of robe under her lab coat. Okay? She was, I guess, an Orthodox Muslim person, or however you want to put it. She was a strict observer of the Islamic religion who had migrated to Canada and was working in this doctor's office. Okay? Why did we have this conversation? What's the background to all this? Well, I can tell you. It's exactly a form of cultural dominion. She's grown up with an education and a set of expectations where it doesn't occur to her that it's immoral or inappropriate for her to say to us in these circumstances, just go home and pray to God. All right? And it is immoral. It's deeply immoral. Even if we did believe in God, even if we were also Christian or something, it would be immoral. It would be wrong to say this to a patient, to a customer, however you want to say, in these circumstances, at a hospital or at a doctor's office. Now, we had another encounter with a Muslim male doctor at the same clinic, same office. I don't know. I think they were married. I think they were husband and wife, but I don't know that. But there was another doctor, who's a male doctor. And my wife went in to report to him a bunch of concerns related to pregnancy and her health. And he was okay up to a point. And then the moment the word vagina came up, which has to come up, guys, pregnancy and childbirth relates to vagina, he completely freaked out. Again, he was trembling and messed up and looking down, putting his face in his hand and saying, and he said this all in a gush of words, that he wants nothing to do with women's health or women's reproductive health. He refuses to have anything to do with that. He wants to focus on men's health. And if she has any problems of that kind relating to pregnancy or health, she should go talk to another medical doctor. He's not going to handle it. This was really unprofessional behavior, and this guy had a complete freak out. Now, he happened to be Muslim. I had one other experience like this with a woman who was a white Christian. She was working, she was not an x-ray technician. She was an ultrasound technician. So she does this scanning to show you the baby. She was a white Christian woman who'd grown up with this white Christian education to such an extent that she literally could not say the word penis or vagina. And like this came up. It's like, we're doing an ultrasound. We want to know the gender of the baby, talking to you. And it's like, wow, you're really bent out of shape by having a Christian upbringing, okay? In this way, profoundly and pervasively, Christianity and Islam are forces that dominate and shape our culture. And just tell me, how's it going to end? When is it going to change? These atheists, these so-called atheists, these fake atheists can sit back and feel morally superior to me and say, oh, you don't understand atheism at all. A true atheist celebrates Christmas. Oh, a true atheist pays $1 billion to rebuild the Notre Dame Cathedral. Oh, no, you must be some kind of lunatic. You must be some kind of maniac to be talking about a long-term cultural change. Well, guess who's winning, guys? This is already 2019. Centuries and centuries have gone past since the French Revolution. Centuries and centuries have gone past since the fundamental idea of having a society built on reason and not on endlessly continuing the cultural ossifications of the past, the cultural assumptions, the cultural accretions of the past. This fundamental challenge to worshiping tradition simply because it's traditional and not questioning whether it's true or good or useful. At what point do we stop circumcising our children because we know it's medically and morally wrong? And at what point do we start passing laws for public safety to prevent parents from making that decision on behalf of their children and cutting off pieces of their bodies? It scars them for the rest of their lives. At what point does that happen, guys? And who are the leaders in this so-called atheist movement who are even willing to ask those questions? Why is it that there's censorship within Reddit atheist groups that will not let my point of view be heard, that insists and enforces uniformity of opinion, that says this Reddit group is committed to the opinion that this is a tragedy, that the Notre Dame Cathedral burnt down, and that it must be rebuilt, and nobody else is allowed to comment, and anyone who says to the contrary will have their contribution deleted or will be banned from the discussion. That's where we're at in 2019. And that's where we're at because so-called atheist movement is by and for fake atheists. It's by and for people who don't even have enough of a long-term vision to think about their own children's future, just one generation, and how it is you can raise your own children not being culturally and conceptually dominated by forces like, Santa Claus, Christmas, Jesus. And ultimately, these are going to have impacts, not just on government policy, not just on how schools are organized, not just on what textbooks are used. Ultimately, this is something that has to have an impact on the physical and social geography of our cities. I don't want the future of Saudi Arabia to be dominated by Islam forever and ever. And I don't want the future of Montreal, Canada to be dominated by the genocidal legacy of the Catholic Church. Because in Canada, it is genocidal. And there's no way you can justify spending millions of dollars on the Notre Dame Cathedral as if it were a Holocaust museum. It's the very opposite. This isn't something telling you the history of the Christian Holocaust. This would be the equivalent of putting millions of dollars into an institution that is pro-Holocaust, that's celebrating the greatness of that same institution during centuries and centuries of slavery, feudalism, Holocaust, all the barbarity of the Dark Ages. Okay? Emmanuel Macron would be in a very difficult position if he stood up and as a leader said, hey guys, the future of France cannot be the endless repetition and worship of our past. If we're going to rebuild the Notre Dame Cathedral, we can't make it into a second-rate imitation of what it was. We have to come up with something better. Even if that something better is a museum explaining to the people of Paris the history of their own city, the history of the role of religion, maybe the history of the French Revolution too. If it was doing something that played a positive educational role for the future of that culture and wasn't trying to simply celebrate the worst aspects of its medieval past.
I mean, really, people like to disrespect my crew, but the fact is that you know my name and I don't know you.